The argument of the month is a men's apostolate that teaches and defends the Catholic faith. The argument of the month provides each month an evening of fellowship where, during the course of a fine meal, a forum on significant current issues of faith and culture stand at center. The war of our time is the war against truth. The argument of the month fights for the truth by seeking the truth and bringing the clarity of truth to the Catholic and the non-Catholic alike. It is the hope of this apostolate that, enlightened by the truth and encouraged by fellowship, participants will return to their homes and workplaces better prepared to live more fully their Christian faith, better prepared to fulfill their proper roles in society and in the family, and better prepared to change the world. That is our mission, that is our hope, and that is the Argument of the Month Club. Thank you very much for coming.
And now to introduce our speaker, Michael Matt from the Remnant newspaper and also a moderator here at AOTM.
Okay, I'm going to just quickly say a few words of introduction for John Henry Weston, and then I'm going to sit down because I really can't wait to hear what he has to say. Rather than me going on and on singing his praises, I think most people in this room are certainly aware of LifeSite News. I think it's the largest English-speaking pro-family, pro-life website in the world. If it isn't, it should be, and it certainly is the most hard-hitting, outspoken, and solidly Catholic website, pro-family website in the world, English-speaking world. Please familiarize yourself with their work. And just by way of quick introduction, why we're not having a debate, which obviously we normally want to do at the Argument of the Month, is have a debate. Ken thought that bringing in John Henry Weston is a great way for us to show the larger debate, which is all of us debating every day against an increasingly Christophobic New World Order, if you will, especially if Barack Obama gets elected back in. We have to learn how to fight. And they've been fighting this fight for a long time up in Canada, and John Henry Weston has got so many ideas that I don't want to cut into his time for how Catholic men can stand up and fight, how we should and must do that. But I want to just set the context then for this debate, features our feature speaker tonight against the Christophobic world by just reading a very short quotation from Blessed Pope Pius XII, who's talking about the reason that we are in the situation that we are in today. Rather than me blathering on, I want to give you the words of His Holiness, which I think is very appropriate by way of introducing Mr. Weston. Pius XII says, "It is to be found everywhere and among everyone. It can be both violent and astute. In these last centuries, it has attempted to disintegrate the intellectual, moral, and social unity in the mysterious organism of Christ. It has sought nature without grace, reason without faith, freedom without authority, and at times authority without freedom. It is an enemy that has become more and more apparent with an absence of scruples that still surprises. Christ, yes. The church, no. Afterwards, God, yes. Yes, Christ, no. Finally, the impious shout, God is dead, and even God never existed. And behold now the attempt to build the structure of the world on foundations which we do not hesitate to indicate as the main causes of the threat that hangs over humanity. Economy without God, law without God, politics without God." End quote. If you think about this quotation, this warning from the 1940s by the great Pope for the period of time that we're living through now, we begin to understand the real problem today in politics. No matter who wins, we're going to face this problem. Hopefully it won't be Barack Obama because it makes the situation much worse. But we're facing a new regime that is essentially godless, that is essentially atheist. And as Catholics, Catholic men, Catholic fathers and grandfathers, we have to try to find a way to survive, to outlive this thing, which ultimately will fall, because our Lord himself promised that in the end it would fall. He would be with us always. So we look to our brothers to the north, in formerly Catholic Canada, no longer Catholic, unfortunately, but much more Catholic than the United States in terms of its history. We look to the violent, Christophobic, anti-Catholic measures that have taken place up there, and we look and see how are they surviving, because as they are surviving is the way we're going to have to follow suit in order for us to survive. So without any further ado, I want to introduce John Henry Weston. I think this is the first time we've ever had a Canadian anyway, so he's come down from Canada to be with us. Please give him a great, warm welcome.
It is a great, great blessing to be with you. If I can get, Father, do you mind saying a very quick prayer before we start?
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, Almighty Sanctifier, God of love, who filled the Virgin Mary with grace, who wonderfully changed the hearts of the apostles, who endowed all your martyrs with miraculous courage. Come and sanctify us, enlighten our minds, strengthen our wills, purify our consciences, rectify our judgment, set our hearts on fire, and preserve us from the misfortunes of resisting your inspirations. Amen. Our Lady of Victory, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Thank you, Father, and thank you to all of you for having me out here. I have to tell you, how incredibly encouraging this is. Being in Canada, we don't get to see 500 people at any event, let alone 500 Catholic men at any event. It is so very encouraging for me to see you here because you still have soldiers. And this is a war. I come from Combermere, Ontario, the smallest place in Canada. But it's the place in Canada that's actually probably most like here in that there is Catholic community still. I have 8 children. Thankfully, our last one came after we lost 3 in a row and we thought we'd have no more. And I myself share some background with many of you. I'm half German. I know it doesn't look like it. Aber, wenn du willst, ich kann Deutsch sprechen. How many here understand German? Hey, gut. Die andere kann gehen weg now. Anyway, but I'm also half Indian. And so when I am at home, I am speaking like this. But because I am coming here, I am going to be speaking with you in that normal English that you guys are liking very much. And Canada is a very multicultural country. I can also speak French, which just goes to show you what we're about. But we are facing a real war. But I'm going to bring it back from the war for a second to deal with really where the war started. How many of you know Peter Kreeft? Peter Kreeft, that's very good. Peter Kreeft is a Catholic philosopher, very, very good and holy man and holy thinker in the church. And he said something once that caught my attention, and I couldn't for the life of me understand why or what it was about. And he said this. He said, have you ever noticed almost the whole of the culture war is about one issue? And everybody sort of waited. And then he gave this laundry list, which is so long I've had to write it down. But it was abortion, same-sex marriage, homosexuality, pornography, stem cell research, divorce, in vitro fertilization, adultery, promiscuity, sex education. And they're all about one issue. Almost the whole of the culture war is about one issue, and that issue is sex. In vitro fertilization is about avoiding sex to have a baby. And we get all of our embryonic stem cells from in vitro fertilization. So why would the whole of the culture war be centered around this one thing? And that was very confusing. But it was the teaching of the church, as explained by various popes, and also by St. Paul in the scripture, that gives you a real clue as to what's going on. The fathers of the church talk about, that schnapps was really good, so if I'm starting to stutter, just call me on it. They talk about even the relationship of the Holy Trinity, mirrored in this relationship that God has put out throughout humanity. Husband loving the wife fully, and wife loving the husband fully, coming together in that total, faithful, and fruitful union, bearing forth another person. And that's how the fathers, some of them described the Holy Trinity. And also in St. Paul, as I alluded to earlier, we have him describing what everybody hears when we read it as husband and wife coming together. He says, the two become one flesh. And all the adults in the room get it. And the kids go, huh? But the point is, it's that relationship, it's that union, it's that intimacy. And yet he stops right after that and he says, oh, but by the way, I'm not talking about what you think I am. He doesn't quite say that, but he says, I'm talking about the relationship of Christ with his church. And it's an amazing thing. So God has set up throughout the world an example of what the Trinitarian love is supposed to be like in the marriage relationship, and what the relationship is of Christ to his church. So let's get to real fundamentals. When I give talks to little kids, I love doing this. I always tell them one thing. All right, I want you to imagine a line that starts at my shoulder and goes this way. It goes on through the roof and it goes on through the sky, and it keeps on going forever. Now imagine another line that goes this way, also starts at my shoulder, believe it or not, and it goes through the floor and through the world to the other side and keeps on going through outer space forever. And then I want you to imagine the point on my shoulder. The point on my shoulder is far less than the thickness of this one sheet of paper. And that thickness refers to something. That thickness refers to your lifespan, in which you decide in that period of time where you're going to go for all eternity, either this way or this way. That's the real reality. That's the starting point for everything, for all understanding. That's what we're here for, to decide in that blip of time where we're going to spend eternity, which in comparison to the blip of our lives, even if you're going to live 125 years, where's the 88-year-old guy? No. It doesn't matter. It's a blip. So that's what we're talking about. Now, let's get back to St. Paul and what he's talking about and what the fathers of the church taught about the Trinity, and look at that relationship a bit more. Peter Kreeft is saying the whole of the culture war seems to be, most of it anyway, around this issue. And it is, and we see it play out. But think about this. If you're Satan, your object is to keep people away from heaven, away from God. If God has given an example that's very common out there of what the Trinitarian relationship is like, of what Christ's relationship with his church is like, he's going to want to screw up that image more than anything else. And that to me was a huge revelation and understanding of why the culture war is so centered on sexuality. And so it doesn't surprise me, and it doesn't surprise you, that Our Lady of Fatima, when she came to the three children, told them that more souls go to hell because of sins of impurity than for any other sin. So this is a war that we're all dealing with. And you know what? In today's day and age, there has never, ever been an opportunity in the whole wide world before us now to sin in this regard. We have access to unthinkable stuff on more devices in our home than probably we have televisions anymore. You know, your phone, your computer, your laptop, your iPod, and everything else, and it's all beamed to you directly. And it's all very tempting and very easy to fall. And that's our great war. The area that this is delved into now is sexuality. And we, and speaking firstly as a Catholic, the church has taken on this issue, especially in the last 40 years, and it continues today, in a way that, for the most part, especially in the West, has not been too helpful. Speaking as a Canadian, I'll tell you where our bishops have gone and how we've dealt with it. We have thought to be quiet as a way of being acceptable in the culture. We have thought to be silent. Even in 1968, when Humanae Vitae came out, our bishops, in fact, they weren't all that silent. They actually put out an objection letter called the Winnipeg Statement. They haven't yet rescinded that statement. But it is a statement of basic dissent, of, well, you know, if you've tried your best, then it's your conscience and it's fine. That was sort of the launch into how to deal with the issue of silence. Or, excuse me, how to deal with the issue of sexuality and culture, and the modus operandi is silence. And let me tell you what silence has got us. Silence about some of the earliest things, like immodesty and total lack of custody of the eyes. How many guys remember hearing in church about custody of the eyes? That's amazing that some of you there, but there's a lot of guys with gray hair, so I understand that. But we don't hear that anymore. Everybody thinks you're a freak if you say, oh, look away. What are you talking about, look away? But it's true. Without that teaching, where do we end up? We end up, well, exactly where we are today. 90% of men addicted to pornography. And that's where we are. What did we get when we did silence on in vitro fertilization? We have 5 million children born of in vitro, which means about what? It means about 45 million or more children who died through the process. Because with in vitro, you kill children rather than only create them. But that's another talk. What did we get on with regard to contraception, allowing it? We got the abortion holocaust. And so silence has served us ill in the church and in the world. And it is the church that will sanctify the world. So wherever you see the church sick, you will see the world very sick. And then let's talk about homosexuality, which you guys are facing, and which is probably today the number one struggle, the one thing nobody wants to talk about. And that nobody refers very especially to the church and her leadership, both in your country and in ours. You guys actually have some courageous church leaders, even among your bishops. And it gets harder as you go up the scale. I'm not saying even to be, down on bishops. As you climb the ladder of social prominence, it gets more and more difficult to speak out because you're more in the limelight and more a target to be taken down. So I'll give you the way we dealt with it. Canada started down the path that you guys have started down in much the same way. You guys in the United States have had all sorts of Christian persecution from homosexual activism, homosexuality already, but you haven't passed same-sex marriage, at least not the whole country. Yet what have you seen already in the United States? You've seen university counseling students denied their degrees, forced into training for sensitivity training on LGBT issues. You've had even actresses and a Miss America lose. Why? Because they were for traditional marriage. You've had people lose their jobs. You've had a former Olympian kicked out from being a spokesman for the Olympics. You've had reporters and teachers and even cookie shops and cake shops getting in trouble. Why? Because they're refusing to cooperate with gay marriage cakes, with proclaiming gay pride days, and refusing to toe the party line. And this is all before gay marriage is passed. It doesn't get any easier once it is passed. Because we had all that in Canada in the years leading up to 2005 when we passed the same-sex marriage law. We had all the same things. We had mayors across the country who said, I'm Christian, I don't want to proclaim Gay Pride Day. And so they were taken to the Human Rights Commission. They usually cost them somewhere in the neighborhood of $75,000 to defend themselves. And in the end, they had to proclaim it anyway. And if they didn't want to, their clerk in the office was to do it for them. We had, all before the passage of gay marriage, we had, now get this is very interesting, especially if there's evangelicals around. And there's lots of those here in the United States, much more than in Canada. But imagine a guy publishing an ad in a newspaper, a paid ad in a newspaper, mind you, that actually doesn't say a word about homosexuality. All it is verses from the Bible that deal with homosexuality, Leviticus, etc., etc. 3 verses with an equal sign. and a little circle with 2 stick figure men in it holding hands with a line through it. That's it. That's all the ad was published, and here's what happened. The guy who published it had to pay $4,500 to 3 homosexual activists who complained and said they were offended by the ad. But not only that, also the newspaper was fined $4,500 for publishing it as well and told that they should never ever publish anything like that again. This is all before same-sex marriage was passed. But it gets even more interesting. Not only does it involve mayors and guys who would publish in newspapers, teachers have been fired from their jobs. Not because they were in class telling their students, oh, by the way, one man and one woman is the only way. No. They were on their own time writing a letter to the editor of the local newspaper, and yet they were fired from their positions in the schools because of that. But the incursion goes even further. We too, like you guys, have had sportscasters and guys in the media dinged, and for absolutely nothing. A friend of mine, his name is Damien Goddard. He was a sportscaster on Rogers Sportsnet. Great guy, great family, and great Catholic. All he tweeted was that he supports this one. There was one sports star who had said something in defense of traditional marriage, and he said, I support so-and-so in the traditional and true definition of marriage. The next day he was called in and fired. These are unbelievable things. You'd think that this could never happen in America, but as I told you before, it's already happened here as well. We used to love to say as Canadians, wow, that would never happen in America. And unfortunately, it's followed exactly our pattern. It takes a few years, but you're right behind us rolling down this hill into the pit. And so I'm here to give you also a warning, because what comes after isn't pretty. It's not only getting fired from your job if you dare to stand up. It's not only being forced into things when you're in public office, but in the end game, they come after the children. And I'll get to that in a minute. Let's go back in Canadian history to 2004. 2004 is a very interesting year because the debate is hot and heavy about same-sex marriage. You have to remember back in 2000 when we passed civil unions, they swore up and down it would never, ever lead to gay marriage. In fact, a lot of people sort of campaigned for civil unions to say, well, at least that way it won't be gay marriage. Nonsense. In fact, when we said nonsense, we were called extremists, alarmists, and everything else. But it was nonsense. And so what happened? So 2004 rolls around. Everybody can sense that this is coming up. The Ontario bishops called together an advisory committee. An advisory committee to advise on how to handle this monster that everybody saw by this point. And they invited myself and my colleague at LifeSite News, Steve Jelsovac, to be on that committee. There's about 12 people around the table. We had some physicians, we had lawyers, we had other publishers of other papers, Catholic newspapers. We had high-ranking officials as well. It was very interesting when I looked around the room because there were literally half of them who actually believed in the church teaching that we were called there to try and help defend. But nonetheless, when we got there, at that point, we had been running LifeSite News for nearly a decade. And I basically said, when I was asked my opinion, well, you know that this has extremely little to do with marriage. Gay marriage has very, very, very little to do with marriage. Homosexual activists, I don't know if you know many of them, but most of them do not have monogamous relationships. I'm sorry, they don't. Average number of partners for a homosexual male is 500. So, why marriage? If you go and read the early literature from the 2000s to the 2004 in Canada in the gay publications, which I have the privilege of doing every once in a while, you will read that they didn't want gay marriage. But the leaders said we have to have this because it's a societal stamp of approval upon our behavior. They don't use those terms, of course. But you know, I can tell you from personal experience, I was on the other side. I wasn't homosexual, but I was addicted to pornography. And I had all sorts of girlfriends and wasn't living the faith by any means. And you can't live with yourself. You've got to do something to make it right because your conscience bugs you. So I first lost my scapular, then told myself God didn't exist. And it would have gone further and further and further because your conscience bugs you, but you think it's everybody else. So here we are, 2004, we're around a table advising the bishops, and we say basically, look, this is not about marriage. This is about approval of homosexual actions, lifestyles, the homosexual behavior. And so you've got to do something that you haven't done in 40 years. You've got to actually speak from the pulpit. You've got to educate your people on this issue. Yes, it's difficult, but it's the only way to bring this message home. Not only because we want education for Catholics, which is very important, but also because it's the only way that works with society in general. And I said that because I had that experience. I was a radio show host in a ridiculous community, as I said, way out, way nowhere, which is made mostly of hippies and Catholics. So this is a very diverse community. Everybody wants to live in the woods, hippies and Catholics. And the hippies are very vocal. In fact, this one who called me all the time to debate, he would always tell me he was smoking a joint at the time, just to sort of goad me or whatever. And it was very interesting because we'd go back and forth with all the normal arguments about homosexuality, same-sex marriage. Well, it's bad for society, it's bad for children. Children need a mom and a dad after all, and marriage is old, and we want to keep the institution, and blah, 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 blah. Which are all good arguments. Very good arguments, in fact. But they all lose in the court of public opinion. Why? Why? Because the other side is all about love. But this is weird, because doesn't the church teach that the highest virtue is love? Yes, they do. Isn't Christianity all about love? Don't we call God love himself? Yes. So now we have a communications problem. Because if the church teaches God is love and the faith is all about love, which it is, and their side says, we're all about love, how is my love for my partner going to harm you in your marriage? How do you answer that? How in the world do you answer that? Because you're saying it's bad for society and what? Yeah, you're against love, aren't you? It sounds insane. And yet the answer is exactly the faith. Because the faith teaches in love. There is a tradition in, I'll say, Judeo-Christianity, because you'll read it in the Old Testament first and then in the New Testament again. It says something about love that's extremely interesting. It says in the Old Testament, in Proverbs, that if you don't discipline your child, you hate him. That's really strong language. You hate him. And in the New Testament, it says the same thing, but it says it in Hebrews, and it refers actually to God. God chastises or punishes or disciplines those whom he loves. How many of you are fathers in the room? Okay, the fathers can get it. Why? Because it's easy. Your 3-year-old and mine will love to do dangerous things. If they're at the side of a cliff, kicking off rocks, and they go way down and make a nice sound when banging on the other rocks 100 feet down, they're enjoying that. Now, what father is not going to go, come here? Even if his son says, oh, Daddy, I like it, it's fun. I'm having a great time. Come here now. You're mean to me. You don't love me. Come here now, or else I'm going to go there and get you. But what is that? Are you a hater because you don't let your son enjoy himself? No, you'd actually hate the child if you left him to play at his peril, perhaps to his death. So there is actually love in discipline. And we've got to do it. That's what we're called to. The answer to this problem, the answer to this war, is actually love. Now let's go back to the bishop's meeting. So we're back at the bishop's meeting, and here's a very interesting thing. We say, you got to start talking about homosexuality because that's what it's all about. And a doctor pipes up. Now this doctor was, at the time, I think 35 years old. She was a specialist. She had foregone all relationships with anybody, and she just set her mind to study. She was a very holy and faithful Catholic. And she said, that's exactly right. I can tell you as a physician that this behavior is so damaging to the human body because it doesn't work that way. It's not meant for that. Do you know that I was at a meeting once where another physician stood up and talked about the behavior that goes on in homosexual relationships? And one of the unknowns is that many homosexual men need to wear diapers. Because the body parts don't work properly anymore. Because they're abused. Because they're not meant for that. In normal sexual intercourse, the vagina is built for that. So it works. In that other type of activity, it doesn't work at all. What that doctor who stood up, you know what he said? He said, sperm has very interesting characteristics. It is supposed to go into and bore into a cell and grow. That's what sperm does. That's what it's supposed to do. The female body, it's like magic. If you can understand the physiology, it's miraculous what happens. The female body has ways that make the sperm go, and once the sperm meets the egg and the sperm enters the egg, the body basically, it's like doing a flush and kills all the rest of it, so that only that one, and sometimes two if the case of twins, but that's another story, but that's it. And the body deals with it because that's what it was meant to do. That's what it was created for. Yet when you put sperm somewhere else, they still do what they're supposed to do. They find a cell, get into it, and grow. Why is anal cancer almost only in one population? But it's also in females, by the way, whose husbands choose to do some horrific thing to them. But the point is, the body is not meant for that. So, said the doctor at the table, without that graphic a description, but nonetheless, I agree. Because we can tell these people, we're saying this out of love. We care about you because this harms your body. My background, actually, believe it or not, is all psychology. I had an MA in psych, and I had a scholarship to do a PhD, and I left that because I didn't feel called to do it and ended up doing news. But anyway. But my whole area of psych, basically, it deals with, psychology, how people work together, how their minds work. And there's an amazing thing, just the way the body works together when man and woman come together. There are so many amazing things when a husband and wife come together, by the way. That sexual union, it creates, the first sexual encounter, by the way, creates a permanent bond between the couple. Just physiologically and psychologically as well. Anyway, that's another point. There's just so much to share, but I can't get into that. But psychologically, we have what's called complementarity. Husband and wife fit together in an amazing, incredible way that benefits them and also their children. And you know what, guys, to be honest, you all know this too. How many of you have had this similar experience to me? I kid you not. Your 3 or 4 year old, no, probably 2 or 3 year old comes up to you and says, "Daddy, I'm having a," and your response is, "Oh, that's nice." And your wife leans over and says, "He wants a banana." And you go, oh, here's a banana. Thank you, Daddy. Because the women, they get it. They are gifted by God with intuition, which many men are not. And I thank God every day that my wife has that because I don't. And so it's beautiful, but it's lacking in homosexual relations. So they're actually hurt physically, really hurt physically. They're really hurt psychologically as well. But most of all, they're hurt spiritually. So in saying, by the way, we're saying this because we love, it makes total sense. Remember the lawyer arguing with me? This was the point. He says to me, how's my love between me and my partner going to affect you and your marriage? And I said to him after a while, I said, look, this does not make me popular. In Canada, we had just passed a hate crime legislation, basically another threat to those who would dare to say something against same-sex marriage. I said to him, look, it doesn't make me popular to say this stuff. In fact, it could one day land me in jail. But I care enough about my brothers and sisters who are practicing that dangerous lifestyle to tell them that it's dangerous. I don't say it in hate. I don't say you're going to go to hell. But I'm saying there's a danger there. And I care about you because I actually love you. So I just want you to know. And I'm not saying this and being mean or nasty. I'm saying this because I love and I care. That very talkative lawyer who always smoked joints? He was silent for the first time. And on radio, silence is kind of weird because people start to go, what, did I lose it or something? Anyway, he said to me this. He didn't convert, I wish. That's it, I'm joining the Catholic Church. No, he said, well, I hope the rest of the church is coming at it from that altruistic perspective. And really, that's the message we need to get across. It's the message that says what we're so uncomfortable saying, this behavior is harmful. All the medical evidence is out there. It's not like it's rocket science. It's plain as day. One of the problems is, though, promiscuity has a lot of the same sicknesses to it. Weird sexuality, even practiced inside the married home, has some of the same consequences if they do the wrong things. But this particular disorder of homosexuality carries about 75 among the males who do it, 75 separate STDs, as they used to be called, that heterosexual whatever doesn't. So there's a far greater preponderance of disease there as well, even when there's sexual problems. But that's not the point, because the church, by the way, Catholics, all of them, are against any kind of sexual aberration. And so it helps to be able to say to your homosexual brother and sister who's doing whatever, hey, guess what? In watching your faithfulness in living a chaste life, it helps me to live a chaste life as well, as a single person, as a married person, as whatever, because we're all called to chastity. So that's where we needed to go, or at least we suggested we needed to go. The others, though, at the table said, oh, absolutely not. That is the last thing we want to do. We want to talk about marriage, about the wonderfulness of heterosexual marriage. And that's what we did. In 80 interventions of the Ontario bishops, in that 1 year before same-sex marriage passed, not once was homosexuality discussed. Not once did we hear that it's out of love, the harm that you're doing with what you're doing to your body, to your psyche, and to your spiritual life. It was about the wonderfulness of heterosexual marriage. And what did it do? Absolutely nothing. It was not even a blip on the radar screen of effectiveness. Same-sex marriage passed in 2005 with no opposition, basically. We had it through the courts, like you might, if you don't pass this. And what we had and what we needed was faithful opposition. But it's not all on the bishops, by the way. It involves us. And that's why I'm so encouraged that there's so many Catholic men here. Catholic men are called to get out there and speak. They're called to speak to their religious leaders. Speak to them in love. That old saying about it's much easier to catch flies with honey than vinegar really, really, really pays off. I'll give you an example. A woman went up wanted to go up to her pastor and ask him to speak on this area of homosexuality because her son heard it in school. But this pastor was like one of those, no, I'll never do that. But she didn't ask him that way, the way maybe some of us would. Father, you need to speak on homosexuality. You haven't done it in 40 years. It's part of the catechism. I read it yesterday. I'll give you the number if you want. You got to do it. Rather, she went up to this priest and said, Father, I don't know what to do. My 14-year-old son got home from high school yesterday, and they talked to him all about same-sex marriage and how wonderful it was, and I'm so confused. Do you think you might be able to say something today in the homily about it? And he did. It wasn't that day in the homily, but it was next Sunday in the homily. But the point is, there are ways to do this. There are ways we can encourage, but we've got to do it. You guys have a hero here, by the way. How many of you know Matt Burke? He just did something miraculous. Everybody know? Who doesn't know? Who does not know what Matt Burke did? Oh my, some of you don't know. Okay, Matt Burke, the NFL star, the guy with 6 kids, just stood up and did I'm for traditional marriage on TV. Hello! That is awesome! Former Minnesota Vikings center, if you guys didn't know him already. And how many of you guys, though, wrote him a letter, email, text, anything to congratulate him on that? This is the type of stuff you have to jump on. You know how hard it is for these guys to come out and say stuff like that publicly? They're going to get hammered, not only by society, they're going to get hammered by their colleagues. They already are. But it's actually the same with our church leaders. Your archbishop has said very good things on marriage. How many of you have sent him a letter of congratulations? Phone call, email. Okay. You got to do better than that. Honestly, they've got to hear from you because you're their support. And if they don't hear from you, they're not hearing from anybody. But they are hearing from the other side, guaranteed. Because the other side's loud. They're used to being a minority and getting on top of the world, and they're loud. Please be loud in a nice way. You need to do this. It's watching what happened in Canada and us die on this. And let me close off in the few minutes I have remaining here. In the end, what happens is they come after the kids. And I know that sounds terrible, but it's true. You see, the activists realized, there's that whole generational thing. There's just some who we're not going to reach. And they're not even talking about the guys who were born in the 60s. They're not talking about the flower children, because they're all on side anyways, so the vast majority are. They're talking about that older generation. So they write them off, and they go after the kids. So once same-sex marriage came in, lo and behold, it was in all the schools. But that's not very surprising. It's now normal marriage in Canada, so why shouldn't it be taught alongside of normal marriage in Canada? What's the problem? So I guess we lost that battle. There was hardly a whimper about it. But we did find that some evangelicals who don't have their own school system objected and said, wait a minute, can't we withdraw our kids and stuff? The answer was no. The answer was no. Toronto School Board has a policy out on dealing with sexual issues in the classroom, and the guidelines say they're not to inform the parents that they're having these classes, and they're also not to allow the parents to withdraw their kids from the classes. Now, if you think that's unique to Toronto, you've got the same thing in New York. It's already here. But in Canada, we have a unique thing. We have a Catholic school system. Kind of like your parochial schools, except they're publicly funded, very unfortunately. But it's funded through our tax dollars. So Catholics pay sort of taxes to the Catholic school system, which are then used for Catholic schools. And they're supposed to have denominational rights. So you'd think that we'd be shielded, at least in the Catholic Church, from this kind of stuff. Well, if you would think that, you'd be dumb. Why? Well, let's think back 2-3 years ago. Bishop Fred Henry out in Calgary, actually quite a liberal bishop, he happened to speak out against same-sex marriage, on homosexuality actually, before the passage of the same-sex marriage bill. And what happened? He was dragged before the Human Rights Commission. And he had to go through lawyers and submit a huge defense, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to defend himself. Eventually, it dropped and went away. But nonetheless, the harassment was there. Another bishop, Peterborough bishop, his priest, one of his priests, had 2 homosexual men serving on the altar. And 20 parishioners complained to the bishop to say, it's not right. They're living together and they're serving on the altar. It's kind of odd. So what happened was the homosexual altar server, when the bishop told him he shouldn't do that anymore, sued the bishop for $25,000 and each of the 10 complaining parishioners for $20,000 each. Now again, after it was fought for over a year, the parishioner agreed, the homosexual server agreed to drop the suit. And another instance of this insanity was actually not Catholic. It was a Christian business. This Christian business was huge. It was called Christian Horizons. It serviced disabled people in Ontario. They had 2,500 employees. They were an evangelical outfit. They had one of those contracts that you sign. I won't drink. I won't swear. I won't cheat on my wife. I won't engage in homosexuality. Bing, 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 bing. Problem. So what happens? One of their employees, after being employed, after signing the contract, in fact, a few years later, decides that she's no longer heterosexual, she's a lesbian. And so she goes, has a conversation with the head of the organization, and they say, okay, well, we'll try and, find you some other work. You're outside of our contract now. Well, lo and behold, the Human Rights Commission decides that that's a no-no. So they decide that the organization, this Christian organization, must pay her $23,000, but that's not the half of it, and send all of its 2,500 employees to LGBT sensitivity training. I'm not making it up. I mean, you can go read it. It's insanity. But we have that insanity. We're living with that insanity. And so, where are we? What are we doing? We should have realized that they would come for the Catholic schools because of our own history. And yet, I kid you not, that's the history that we've come from. We have this hell going on. But it's increasing now. Since the passage of same-sex marriage, the work in the schools has started. The increasing inability or unwillingness, if you will, of the church to say stuff is costing. It's costing individuals because when the church doesn't do it, it'll take family men to do it. So I know friends of mine who have been already taken before human rights commissions. We are, LifeSite News is in the same boat. We have a lawsuit against us, actually by a Catholic priest, who's in Quebec. And he was Canada's Drynan, if any of you guys remember Father Drynan from the States. Anyway, this is a pro-same-sex marriage, pro-choice, as he likes to call it, priest. And we reported on him for about a decade or so. Eventually, the Vatican, actually reading our material, decided to force his bishop to get him out of Canadian politics because he became a Canadian politician. And he was given an ultimatum, either leave politics or leave the priesthood. He chose to leave politics and then sue us for the loss of his job. According to him, the Vatican, when it forced his bishop to act on him, sent a dossier of LifeSite News articles. So we're being sued for $500,000. I'm named individually, as are all of our writers who ever wrote on him. And that's tough because we're all family people for the most part. As I said, I have 8 children. And this is what we face. And there is, I don't want to leave you on this sort of totally depressing thing. And the most powerful thing, and this is the takeaway for you guys before we go to questions, is this. The power that you guys have right now is not to be squandered. The power that you guys have right now is in the power of the cross. Because you will face the cross. It actually doesn't matter who gets elected in November. You're still going to face this giant. And you will suffer for it if you choose to do the right thing. But in doing that right thing, you will have more grace than ever before. Because what do the scriptures say? Where sin abounds, there grace abounds all the more. We are living in the times the scriptures talk about. Never before in history has it been so much like they will call evil good and good evil. Everybody thinks they're doing God's own work when they're after you for being against love, for being a hater and a bigot because you oppose same-sex marriage. It's going to happen. But in that suffering that you endure, in those fights you undertake, which, by the way, can be successful, as we've seen in the Canadian examples, after many years and much money, by your suffering, you will heal many people. By your suffering, you will convert many people. And by your suffering, you will also save your own souls. And again, I have to tell you, I know this from personal experience. You see, I told you before I was on the other side, and it's true. I was living a lifestyle far, far, far from the church. And I had a very interesting example at home. My dad was a very faithful Catholic, much like some of these good Catholics here. And I'm very, very pleased to get to know you guys better. But he practiced the faith. He was a daily Mass, daily Rosary Catholic. He got married at 43 because he thought he was going to become a priest. And my mom actually sort of thought she could make him a regular Catholic like she was. And eventually, after 18, 19 years of marriage, she left him for that reason. I remember growing up, and he would get made fun of by his family. He was a visa officer earlier on in his life. He would bring people into the country, and he would allow people in. And sometimes when they were poor, he would let them sleep in his house. Except he was also letting his mom and sister sleep in the house, and so they weren't at all happy with this. They were particularly unhappy when sometimes he would give away his furniture to them. So he was like that, though. He was called an extremist because he did these things. When I remember he was getting a haircut once by my mom, and he was sitting there, and he was mouthing prayers. He was praying, and she caught him, and she hit him, and she said, "What are you doing? Can't you ever just stop?" When I was a little kid, I think I was 8 years old, he said to me, I would rather see you drop dead right now than fall into a life of sin. When I hit 14 and I was doing all that sinning, that haunted me, you know. But he was the most loving guy. I would come home from clubbing at 3 a.m. in the morning. I did a lot of dancing, and I was too cheap to drink, which saved me from insanity. But I would see him there praying at his bedside still, sometimes humped over, like falling asleep, but still kneeling there. And I'd say to myself, what a silly old man. I remember I was on the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning talking to my girlfriend. I heard something in the backyard. I grabbed the barbell ready to club whoever it was because we were in Parkdale in Toronto, which is really rough. And there was my dad kneeling by the statue of Our Lady in the backyard at 2 in the morning. Oh, yeah. But you know, I had a life of sin that lasted from the time I was 14 till the time I was about 21, 22 years old. By that time, I was in such trouble with the law. I had 18 speeding tickets in 1 year. Well, I was speeding tickets, parking tickets, and also accidents, actually. 3 of those were accidents. That was kind of nasty. And that same year, because I had already lost my license, when they caught me the other time, I said I was my friend. And of course, that's fraud. And so the police came to the door and took me away. And my dad had to put up with that too. I was in school and I was doing crappy because I wasn't applying myself, and now I was losing my education and my job and apparently my girlfriend too, who I had for a long time but had others at the same time. And that all got so nasty. My life was in shambles. I tried to pray. But I had convinced myself, because of that guilt thing, that God didn't exist. So it was an Our Father here and there. And I was still addicted to porn. Could not get out of it. I'd give it up one day and the next day find myself walking there asking myself, what am I doing? It had a hold on me like nothing else. finally, I went to a book my dad gave me when I was 14 years old. I had it on my shelf for a while. It's called True Devotion to Mary by St. Louis de Montfort. Anybody heard of that? Okay, so that book's the most powerful book on earth next to the Bible, so I would encourage you all, take nothing from this talk, just go and get that book and read it. St. Louis de Montfort's True Devotion to Mary. I said to him, I read the book, and I realized, oh, Lord, this does not mean just Sundays. This means every day, all day, my whole life. And it made sense, though, but I didn't believe in God. That's when my crisis of faith really hit. You play with, does God really exist? If someone could really prove to me that Jesus walked the earth, maybe I'd believe. You play with yourself like that, and eventually you don't believe, especially when it comes to you have to change your life for this. So literally, I took the book, put it under my arm, and I went to my dad, and I had this whole speech prepared to give him. Dad, I know only one thing in life anymore, that you love me. Because my life is so screwed up, I know nothing else. So I read your book. Please tell me one thing. Is this real? I know you love me. You're not going to lie to me. I'm willing to do this, but it means my whole life, and I don't want to give up my life for a lie. Is this real? To be honest, I never could ask him the question. Why? Because his whole life spoke to me, especially the persecutions he endured at my hands, those of his family, his wife who left him, his older sister, his mother. Those persecutions he endured said to me louder than he ever could have, in a way that was so convincing to me, it made for what I would honestly call my salvation. Without true devotion, I would be dead now and in hell. But that is the power of persecution suffered in love. That is the power you all have to witness to the truth in love. The Pope's encyclical Caritas in Veritate is our key, truth in love, on this issue of homosexuality, of all the sexual aberrations that are out there today. Truth and love is our key to victory, because they are the victory that, yes, will come with sacrifice, but that sacrifice will itself be redemptive, and it will lead to life, and it will lead to victory, both on a personal level in our own souls and for our country as well. God bless you guys, and I'll take any questions.
I don't have a question. I don't believe in conspiratorial theories, but I'm afraid of them.
Oh, okay. All right. John?
Okay, you addressed caring for the homosexual using health issues and angles of that nature. Well, that's fine and good, and I've heard a lot of the statistics you talked about the practice of male homosexuals. Okay, but now how about lesbians? They're women. My understanding is male homosexuality is a totally different creature than lesbianism. I mean, you've got male homosexuals is basically just unbridled sexual passion between two male creatures who want to be unbridled, and lesbianism is a little bit different creature. These are women who basically have the instinct of bonding maybe with one more than men do, and the health issues, I don't think that angle really works with the lesbian issue. Even my understanding is I worked for government for years. I know a lot of women who all of a sudden switched in the middle of their life, because we were surrounded by a bunch of militant bull lesbians, and they would switch back and forth. So it seems to be a different creature, and your arguments don't seem to me to work with that portion of the homosexual community.
For one thing, actually, it does. If you speak to physicians, you will see that even among the lesbian population, only lesbian sexual encounters, they actually have a very much elevated STD risk as well. Not only that, though, they have a very unhealthy psychology, and it's always the same in terms of spirituality. There's a threefold argument, both the physical and the psychological and the spiritual. And whereas it is true because of the physical damage that men do to one another when they engage in that activity, it is less than what you'll see in the lesbian population. There is, however, specific STDs that are specific to lesbian activity. The difficulties are the practices that the sexual practices that they engage in are, you wouldn't want to describe them at a meal. So that's one of the difficulties. But you can actually talk to physicians. In fact, if you go to LifeSite News, you will see a document signed by all sorts of doctors, specialists in the field that deal with all the various disorders that come from these sexual aberrations. So I'd encourage you to go to LifeSite News and look up the evidence there. If you ever have a problem finding something on LifeSite News, we do have a search engine that searches all of our articles way back to 1997 when we first went online. It's all there for your reference, so please do make use of it.
Also, I would like to address the first man that came up and talked about conspiracy theories. I guess maybe if you could just address that, John, about people saying, "Oh, this is just you're blowing this out of proportion. This is all just a conspiracy theory." And kind of walk through some of those people who might say, "Well, what about criticizing the clergy and those kinds of issues?" If you could address some of that.
Absolutely. For one thing, it's hard to say that to a Canadian because we've lived through it. We went through the period where they were saying, "Oh, you're conspiracy theorists. Oh, you're extremists. You're alarmists." And then every single thing we predicted would happen happened. So it's no longer a reality for Canadians. It's 20 years ago when people were warning about this stuff, they were called conspiracy theorists and alarmists. But it's all panned out. So now it's kind of difficult to have that same thing play out. But everywhere where it is still not yet passed, the same lines are used. Conspiracy, oh, it's never going to be that way, and so on and so forth. You were also mentioning about
criticizing the clergy.
Criticizing the clergy. For one, we should try never to do that. But we're put in very awkward situations today. Today, there's an organization called Priests for Life that has to exist. I once remember hearing from a priest who I agreed with wholeheartedly saying, "That's a ridiculous organization, Priests for Life. Every priest is for life." And my only response could be, I wish it were so. We're dealing with a situation where we have, to the great detriment of all of us, the whole nation, where a lot of clergy aren't maintaining faithfulness to what they're being asked to do by the Holy Father. And I say that very specifically because I'm going to read you a couple of documents. They're all available through the Vatican website. You can also get them on LifeSite News. These are statements from the Vatican about what the Church is supposed to do and teach with regard to this very difficult of issues. And it is, ignored. I'm going to read you from one article. This is called "A Letter to the Bishops of the Catholic Church on the Pastoral Care of Homosexual Persons." And it was put out by the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith way back when, by a guy named Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, who, if anybody doesn't know, is now Pope Benedict. He said some very interesting things, though. He said, for instance, I want to quote exactly, that's why I'm going to read. "It is deplorable that homosexual persons have been and are the object of violent malice in speech or in action." Everybody agrees. "Such treatment deserves condemnation from the Church's pastors whenever it occurs." So far, everybody's on board. And if you're not, there's a problem. Because there are some people, I know some people who are like angry about it and just want to beat people up, and that's just the wrong way. But, now listen to this. But the proper reaction to crimes committed against homosexual persons should not be to claim that homosexual condition is not disordered. When such a claim is made, and when homosexual activity is consequently condoned, or when civil legislation is introduced to protect behavior to which no one has any conceivable right, neither the church nor society at large should be surprised when other distorted notions and practices gain ground and irrational and violent reactions increase. What? That's the Vatican saying this? Yes, it is. And these are quotes directly from Ratzinger's document. There's more to it, too. And it gets into very specific things. And let me just read one more, because it is so very important to know the teaching of the church, not only for the bishops to know it. This was a letter written to the bishops, but it was sent out publicly so that you and all of us can remind our spiritual leaders of their duty. Now remember what I said. When we have many of us, I will say us because this is almost universal in all of the West, you'll have parishes and things with LGBT whatever. We have gay masses. We have, and they don't call them that maybe, but everybody knows, yeah, if you go here to that parish, it's a gay mass. And what happens? It's all people with their partners, and they're all there, and they're all trouncing up for Holy Communion as well. But here's what the Vatican says about it. No authentic pastoral program will include organizations in which homosexual persons associate with each other without clearly stating that homosexual activity is immoral. Oh my gosh. So we can't have a dignity mass? We can't even have a dignity group? No, you can't, because they don't teach that homosexuality is immoral. So you can't have it, period. That's just the faith. A truly pastoral approach will appreciate the need for homosexual persons to avoid the near occasion of sin. But, okay, then get this. We wish to make it clear that departure, now listen very carefully to this. We wish to make it clear, this is the Vatican, this is Cardinal Ratzinger making it clear to the bishops of the world. We wish to make it clear that departure from the church's teaching or silence about it in an effort to provide pastoral care is neither caring nor pastoral. Only what is true can ultimately be pastoral. The neglect of the church's position prevents homosexual men and women from receiving the care they need and deserve. What is it? It's all about love. We have to proclaim this, and we're not doing it. So it's not about attacking our bishops. It's begging and pleading with our religious superiors to please help, if not for our sakes, at least for the sake of our children. That's what this comes down to. Our children are going to be in this war, and there is a solution to it. And the solution to it has to come from the church. It's been asked for by the Holy Father, and we're there to remind our prelates if need be. It shouldn't be. But the best way to remind them is to encourage them. If Archbishop Nienstadt wrote something, write him a thank you letter, because it's not easy. That's the most successful thing you can do to encourage him, because I guarantee you he's getting from the other side. Another question?
One of the issues that we're dealing with in the States is the new health care law, which goes into effect sometime either late 13 or early 14, where every organization, if you employ non-Catholics or have a Catholic organization that you employ non-Catholics, that you have to provide them with coverage for abortion, contraceptions and sterilization or some other things.
Yeah, it's abortifacient drugs and
Yeah.
contraception and sterilization.
Right.
Yeah.
The government, the Catholic Charities complained, and the government came out and said, well, Catholic Charities doesn't have to pay that. Their insurance company does. But Catholic Charity is self-insured, and so the money we give to our parishes, some of that is siphoned off and given to these organizations to pay for that. There's a state already, and I don't know if it's Massachusetts or New York, that has threatened to close down Catholic Charities in the state when it goes into effect. Just for the people here, 75% of all care to the disadvantaged, the unemployed, disabled children, and other people that need our help are in that mix. And the thinking now is Catholic Charities may just shut down nationwide. And I was wondering, in Canada, was that an issue, or is that just a separate issue here?
Well, first of all, are those stats correct? I guess I just wanted to verify that. Yeah, okay. We don't know if those stats are correct. That's
Okay.
just from what you're saying. Okay.
But one of the things, absolutely. Let's just touch for a second on religious freedom, which is being encroached upon here in the United States through the HHS mandate in huge ways. But it's the area actually we've seen a fight on. That's why there's a huge war on this. You know that you already had to close something down on another issue which there wasn't too much fuss made over, right? No? Okay. It's the gay issue. The HHS mandate is being fought, and I dare say so well, because it's being actually fought publicly by the bishops with strong statements. People are coming out. People are mobilizing. There's stand-up rallies all over the country. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people are getting engaged. We're having Protestant colleges sue on behalf of the Catholic Church for themselves, and they're sort of for contraception, but they're suing nonetheless. You have statements all over the country, we're all Catholics now, from Protestants. It's like one of the greatest ecumenical moves we've ever done. We should ask Obama to do it again. No. But it's amazing. Why? Because there was an outcry. And where did the outcry come from? It came from the bishops themselves. And so you see the power when you have mobilization. Some people say there could be more done. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. But you know what? They're doing something. But you know, a few years ago, we had to close down. I'm speaking as an American now. But anyway, Boston had Catholic adoption. They ran it for 100 years. And so when Massachusetts did the gay marriage thing, and when Massachusetts basically said, in order to run a foster or adoption care agency, you have to not be a hater and a bigot. No, they didn't say that. But not be discriminatory and not exclude families of 2 men and 2 women. Boston Catholic, the adoption center there said, well, we'd have to close our doors after 100 years. And basically, they closed. But there wasn't the same hue and cry. Partially because the issue of homosexuality is actually harder even than the issue of contraception. But it is, in my opinion, the homosexual question that will really bring on a persecution if we remain faithful. We have to. But it's really going to come on strong. It has in Canada. That's what we saw. And it is an encroachment on religious freedom in many, many, many respects. Both even on the altar, as the example came with the homosexual altar boys, or altar server men, whatever. So it is a massive incursion on religious freedom.
Next question.
My name is Ray Marshall. Most Americans really don't know an awful lot about Canada, I think. What we have known in the past is that they were pretty much quiet and unassuming and not very dominant. And then all of a sudden, after Pope Paul VI Humanae Vitae encyclical in 1968, virtually all but one of your bishops said, no, you Catholics can do what you want. And 100% Catholic Quebec is now, 1% Catholic Quebec? What's caused all this? It's got to be more than just the homosexual campaign, which is extremely effective.
There was, there was a real revolution. We call it the Quiet Revolution. But Canada did. Particularly Quebec. You have to understand, Canada is still a majority Catholic country. And the seat of Catholicism in the whole New World was in Quebec. The North American martyrs, we call the Canadian martyrs. And they're centered, the faith was so strong in Quebec in the 40s and 50s. You had thousands of pilgrims to shrines. You had just a vibrant Catholic life. But there's all sorts of theories as to what exactly caused the actual revolution. I'm not going to get into that. However, what we saw happening was an abandonment of the faith and a rebellion against it, even by the leadership of the church there. I'm going to give you a snapshot of Canada. Now, I have to tell you at the same time, we have improved in Canada, big time. I'll give you the example. Back in the year 2000, Canada had already been copying the United States and running a March for Life for a few years. We had, only 2,000 or 3,000, 4,000 coming in the first couple of years. And we learned it because we came down here and we saw your amazing March for Life, the sea of bishops and priests, and it was unbelievable. And hundreds of thousands of people. It was awesome. I mean, we went down and, when you're a pro-lifer in Canada, you feel really lonely. And you got there and you went, oh my God, oh my. I mean, it was incredible. Anyway, so we came back and we tried it ourselves. And we have it in May. Canada's way too cold to even dream about it in January. But we could never get a bishop to come and celebrate a mass for us. So we think we started them in 97. We found this one bishop who, after he retired, had a conversion in Medjugorje. And so he would come and he would celebrate for us the March for Life Mass every year. And that went on 97, 98, 99, 2000. Now, at the same time, we're going down. We every year traveled, meaning myself, Steve Jelsovac. At that time, we were just about doing it ourselves. So we would go down to D.C. for the March for Life and be totally blown away. But the biggest blow away even wasn't the people. Because we had, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. That's equivalent to 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 here because we're a tenth of your population. But the biggest difference was this whole lack of bishops there. But in 2000, there was also a March of Women. It was an international March of Women, and it was for women's rights, so women would not have to be slaves, and they wouldn't suffer sexual persecution and rape. But it was also pro-abortion and pro-same-sex, lesbian or whatever. So for that reason, even though it had some good elements to it, the U.S. bishops decided to not support it. However, I always reported every year on this March of Women, and this was a big one in 2000. They were making a big hoopla. So I went to the website of the March for Women and saw their sponsors, and I always went and picked on the sponsors, and we'd tell people who they were, and people would send them nasty emails and so on and so forth. So the normal game, But this time when I went there, I saw a donation from Development and Peace, which is our equivalent of Catholic Relief Services. And I said, what? That's impossible. So I called them. And the guy on the phone said, it's nominal, we might have given them like $10,000. And we're freaking out because they never gave us $10,000. Heck, they never gave us $5,000. They didn't even give us anything. But the point was, why are they funding this pro-abortion march? Yes, okay, it's for, they like the don't be raped and all the nice things of it. But the U.S. bishops all boycott this thing because it's pro-abortion and pro-lesbian, very vehemently so. And our guys are funding it. We found out later they lied. They didn't fund it $10,000. They funded it $135,000. They just didn't want to tell us at first, I guess. I don't know what it was. So I won't claim lying. I'll just claim maybe he didn't know. But there was a bigger problem. Bishops, after we first reported it, some bishops actually, 5 of them in fact, including the then Cardinal Archbishop of Toronto, a different one who's since passed away. Oh no, not yet passed away. But came out on our side and said, yes, it's unacceptable to support this. And then other bishops came out and said, no, it's totally acceptable to support it. It's the first time in Canadian church history that there was open breaks in what they call collegiality. In fact, I was in a history class sometime later, many years later, in fact, and I learned, oh yes, and there was that break in collegiality back in 2000 over the March of Women. And I put my head down thinking, oh my gosh, that was us. The difficulty was it was very public because I had the newspapers calling me every day to find out if there was a new bishop who had come out on either side. Well, the March of Women actually also had a mass to launch their little march that they did through Canada. 6 Canadian bishops celebrated the March of Women Mass at the same time when only one retired bishop would ever celebrate the March for Life Mass. Now, in the intervening 12 years, we've had a lot of very good things happen in Canada. We had some shuffling go on, putting some of the most orthodox bishops in charge of the best sees, and we've had some very good appointments. So that today, the March for Life Mass has 5, 6, 7, 8 bishops, and over the country, there's 25, 35, 45 bishops that celebrate March for Life Masses in their local dioceses with their own people. So things have certainly, thanks be to God, improved in amazing ways. But it's still a massive struggle. Every year, just about, we report on the Bishop's Agency, the CRS equivalent in Canada, funding inappropriate groups. And that is ongoing. And it's unfriendly. I mean, you have to understand what we do, too, is we don't just go and blare it out with a look what they're doing. No, we actually first, we call the agency. In the case, we just actually did a report on Catholic Relief Services itself, funding pro-abortion groups. And the first thing we do is talk to people on the inside and tell them, hey, guys, we're a news agency. We're telling you this now. In fact, when we were reporting on CRS, I left it a month with people at the pro-life office and the US CCB main office to tell them, hey, guys, look, here's the groups. I gave them a précis of what we found in case they wanted to do something before we had to report it. But you can't actually say that, otherwise it's blackmail. So we just said, here, look. After a month, they told us we had to talk to CRS, so we called CRS, and CRS was, of course, yes, so. And, in fact, CRS said there's no problem with it, and it was approved by John Hunt. Then it was a big mess. But anyway, then a month went by, so we were going to report on it, and then the Fortnight of Freedom was happening. And so we held it. No news agency holds a really hot story, but we did because we're Catholics and we don't want to do anything to burn the church. It's all about getting it to clean up. We shine light in places that people would prefer stay dark, but nothing changes if they stay dark. And so it's our job, if you will, to do that light shining, and it doesn't win us many friends. I've been banned for the last 2 years from the plenary session of the Bishops' Conference, which is open to the media, because they say we're not media or something. So, I mean, and it goes on and on and on. There's long lists of things like that. But the thing that really is encouraging for me is that there's guys like you out there. Because when you get this weird kind of bashing from even church leadership, you start to lose it a little bit. You go, oof, that's weird. We were called by a very prominent priest in Canada. I hope I can get the quote right again. Basically, we're doing the work of Satan. That's really tough. Because sometimes you really would wonder, oh, Lord, what am I doing? But thankfully, where I live, it's an area where there is good Catholic support. I have a priest who gives me spiritual direction, my own bishop, whom I know and can talk to freely as well. So thankfully, there's that support out there, because otherwise you do start to lose it after a little while.
This isn't so much a question as it is an idea that I'd like to share, if that'd be all right. Father Eckert mentioned earlier this evening about encouraging people to listen to talk radio, and I happen to have that opportunity to do that pretty much throughout the course of the day because of the nature of the work that I do. I'm a driver. I wish I were articulate and as conversatory about the topic that we're talking about tonight. But I'd like to ask a question of all of us guys here, because I do believe that we are supposed to be bold, and we need to be. And so the idea that I wanted to put out there was perhaps not just listening to the people that we agree with on the radio, but not all of us are called to do this, but I think it would help if each of you would think about it, ask others that you might know, or pray about it yourself to consider calling up the radio stations. There's one radio station in particular that is on the AM dial, and they used to call themselves the Good Neighbor, but they don't do that anymore. And from 9 to noon, I'm just going to be bold because I listen to this every day and it makes me sick. But the John Hines program is on from 9 to noon every day, 5 days a week, and then from noon until 3, the Chad Hartman show is on, and then from 3 until 6, the John Williams show is on. And you can count on almost every day the Catholic Church is under attack, just through the language, the topics that they pick, and particularly marriage itself is really under attack. So please consider, my question is, would you consider praying about this and possibly being one who might call the radio station out of charity? Ask the Holy Spirit, of course, I know that's what we're supposed to do. Ask the Holy Spirit to give us the words, but to confront them in charity and in truth, and push back and say, I just heard something and it's not quite right, and hopefully we can have a discussion about this that really hasn't been included in terms of the way they're presenting the issue. So I don't want to drag on here, but consider, if you can, your occupations probably don't allow you to listen to the radio as much as mine does, but consider calling up the people who are really pushing against us right now. We can make phone calls, direct phone calls to people that do or don't want to listen to us, but the people in the middle, the independent voters, and those who really are against what we're about, those are the people that listen to that station, and you might just plant an idea with them. So I ask you to just consider doing that.
Thank you. John,
any
words on that about being active?
Absolutely. Being active with your media is very important. They actually listen to reader and viewer feedback. So if you ever see something, write the producer, and they actually take that seriously. I heard talks by people who are on the inside of the business, and they do take it very seriously. So I encourage you to do that as well. I want to close on 2 points, and if I could, they're both very concerning because it's where and what is happening in the future in Canada that alarms me most. We recently made a registry. It's actually a homosexual group that made it, but they did it with government funding. It was a registry of homophobic acts. which they defined as any negative act toward homosexual persons or homosexuality in general. And it also included in their list of abuses unfavorable media presentations, which is greatly alarming to us, but also to everybody else. This registry, you're supposed to snitch on your neighbors and friends, etc., etc. And you'd think, oh, well, that's bad enough. It's done with government money and all these guys have our names and stuff. But it's worse because when it was presented publicly, it was the chief of police there presenting it with the group, which was very concerning. But it's a non-official thing. But that's often how these things start. And finally, how will this thing come to blood? I am very concerned because we've been picked on twice so far in Canada with this same issue, and that is in education. Once Catholics who are serious about their faith pull their own children out of the schools, and they have to pull them in Canada now out of private schools too because we're enforced there as well, they then homeschool, which is almost an insane activity. But when it's enforced in homeschooling, that's when there's a big problem because there's nowhere to run anymore. In Canada, in Quebec, they have what's called the Ethical and Religious Culture course, which teaches relativist religion and also that families are equal, meaning homosexual families are equal to heterosexual families. It's supposed to be taught in all schools, Catholic, private, public, and homeschool. It already went to the Supreme Court, a challenge that was dismissed on technicalities. So right now, it seems that it's gone to Supreme Court and everything's fine to enforce on homeschoolers in Quebec that they must teach their own children the equality of gay families. They tried this, and of course, so in Quebec, it's a done deal. We haven't yet seen prosecutions on this, but we're waiting for it. They tried the same thing in Alberta. The Alberta Human Rights Code was given precedence in education, and the minister said that it would apply also to homeschooling. There was a hue and cry because Alberta is our most conservative province. We blasted this through LifeSite News. They must have had, I don't know how many, tens of thousands of complaints. They had demonstrations all over the province, and the province backed down. Surprise, surprise. But that's where the rubber will hit the road in terms of when we come to blood, because I don't know many dads out there who will willy-nilly hand their children off to social services to go and be educated properly. And it won't be pretty. The example I take of it not being pretty is not from Canada, it's from your United States. There is a case in the United States, it is an odd case. There was a Vermont lesbian couple who, I shouldn't say couple, but whatever, there were two lesbians who were living together. And one of them got impregnated through artificial insemination. That same woman left her partner, her lesbian partner, and became a Christian and decided to raise her child a Christian. The courts actually awarded joint custody to her lesbian partner, even though there was no physical relation to the girl at all. Well, she took her for visits and whatnot. Eventually, the girl was coming home from the lesbian disturbed, saying, "Mommy, she's telling me all this weird stuff, and then she's bathing with me naked." So the mother decided to say, "That's enough. We can't do this anymore." So she, of course, filed in court against this, and the courts actually awarded full custody to the non-related lesbian partner. At which point, the woman in question, the mother, fled the United States. Her name is Lisa Miller. She's being pursued in every country on earth by the FBI. They can't find her. But it's your government pursuing her, threatening other countries with punishments if they don't cough her up. And the saddest, it's actually a heroic part of the story, but I'm just sad that it wasn't Catholics. There was a Mennonite community that shielded her. And they're in real trouble with their own nation because the U.S. is very powerful. And when you push, everybody goes, okay. But you know what their response was when they were asked by the media, aren't you scared? You know, the U.S. is after you, your government's after you now. They said, we would rather die than hand this child and this mother over to what is not God's law. It was awesome, that witness. But so that's endgame, at least as I see it right now. And that's what we're facing. The answer is still love, though. It's that sacrificial love. Fight, men. Fight. Thank you.
Closing prayer is to St. Michael the Archangel. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and sins of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host,